Welcome to 3D Movie Cinema, the only show that is 3 dimensions away from Final Destination being called Flight 180. I'm your host, 3D Jake, and today we're looking at Final Destination, released in 2000. Final Destination is directed by James Wong and is written by Glenn Morgan, James Wan, and Jeffrey Riddick, from a story by Jeffrey Riddick. The movie stars Devon Sawa, Ali Larter, Carr Smith, and Tony Todd. The movie is essentially based on a spec script by Jeffrey Riddick, who worked on the X-Files TV series with also James Wan and Glenn Morgan. And essentially, when they were working on, Jeffrey Riddick, who I guess saw a story on the news about a woman who said that, Flight 800 was going to blow up or explode. And back in 1996, disaster that happened, and it actually did. And so I guess Jeffrey Riddick said this would be a great episode for the X-Files of a dude, a kid who predicts this plane's going to blow up, and it does. And apparently he wrote the whole script, and then of course it was kind of rejected and everything. And so of course Glenn Morgan and James Wan really liked the idea, and so then they rewrote the script and everything and added a lot more stuff and made it more gruesome and focused, because his perspective was not going to be on the kid, it was going to be on the FBI agents, Mulder and Scully, when it was an X-Files script. But then when it became a original movie, that's when the script was, retooled, and they turned it into an original. They focused on the kid and thus not on the FBI agents. And I thought that was a good idea, and I'm glad that they didn't just turn this into an X-Files episode, because that would have been, man, we would not got 5 films and upcoming 6 films without that. I really enjoyed this movie a lot. This movie is really great and everything, and you can tell in the movie that there are definitely similarities between, this is meant to be an X-Files movie, because you could tell this was, there was, FBI agents in the movie that that are basically, the Mulder and Scully of this movie. And I really enjoyed this idea of this movie about, how we're not safe from death and everything, and how basically it's death could, cause these accidents. And I know they were toying with the idea of death being an entity or death being a real person. And I'm just really glad that it's not it's just basically the wind, that causes just their accidents that happen, and we're all marked for death. I like that idea aspect, and I just want to say that I think that's a really cool concept. And what I like about this movie, seriously, is that it really embodies the idea of, are we safe from death? Because it's not just, there's not, a Grim Reaper man chasing after us. It's actually just, wind that causes all this, mayhem and stuff. For instance, there's breaks, wind might, make a screwdriver fall, and it goes and messes up brakes on a bus, and then the bus is, can't control itself, and then the bus just runs off the road, and then the bus coincidentally runs into this person. So it's it's kind of like the domino effect of a lot of 3 or 4 things would have to happen for this to kill you, and I will say one thing I like about this movie is that it doesn't necessarily focus on the domino effect of A, B, C, and D is going to have to happen for you to die. It kind of just feels just naturally occurring things, a dude literally a toilet crack makes a dude slide on it, and he falls into the wire that he's doing his laundry on and strangles himself. And but when he falls in there, the soap, he accidentally knocks over soap to where it's hard for him to even stand up, where he ends up strangling himself accidentally. And I thought that's a good idea concept. It's I love all the movies, but the more as they go on, it becomes more and more A, B, and C. A ladder falls. Even in the new trailer for the new movie, the ladder falls, and then this fall happens, and then this happened, and then eventually then this would happen. So it's in real life, it would probably A and B, but no, you would not get C, D, E, F, It would just be no, the odds of that happening are slim. Okay, but what I like about this is that the movie doesn't focus on the death aspect, because I feel in most of the movies nowadays, they don't even really humanize the characters. It just feels okay, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, and this is going to happen. And, and the characters are just they get maybe 10 minutes of their personal life backstory. And then eventually it just goes on to, okay, these people die in the crash. Then we're going to go on to these people, and then we're going to go on to these people, and then they're going to die in this way, okay? And so I actually like that aspect of it, that it's that, we actually get to sit with these characters. And I like that the story is, the focus is not on the death, it's on these characters that went through a tragedy, and then it even gives you room to breathe. It doesn't even just go right to the next death, and I like that, because even the newer movies, it goes to the next death. This one actually sits there and breathes with these characters, to where I really enjoyed that, where I'm like, okay, you know, like there's even a scene where after a girl gets hit by a bus, you know, you get like an Alka-Seltzer scene where like they're sitting there just watching the news, because the director said after that the audience was so shaken by that death that, you know, the Alka-Seltzer scene was added in post-production. And I thought that was well done, because it's like, yeah, this is a really fucked up thing that happens. Like, these people survived a tragedy, and I like how it builds it up. It's like they survived this plane crash, and then it goes to the next, like, okay, like, a week goes by, they have the funeral, a week goes by, and then, of course, that's when, like, the first death happens, where a dude, like, oh, he just committed suicide. And then, no. Then a woman gets hit by a bus, and then he realizes, like, we're on this pattern of death's list where we're all meant to die. That we're meant to die in the plane. Like, the realization of this happens, where he's like, oh my god, like, this was Todd's seat, then it was Terry, then he said Mrs. Luton is next, and then, you know, in her death, I mean, it feels like every character in the movie, except for, I would say, 2 people, like, their deaths, to me, it's like, I honestly, Mrs. Luton had just, like, tragic death, because she was just a mentally disturbed person after that plane crashed. She just became, like, you know, almost hermit style, where she wants to stay away from people and doesn't want to talk to people. And then when she, you know, she just gets a tragic when it, like, you know, her computer blows up and gets her throat, and then her house burns down, and, you know, and Alex tries to save her, and the only person, you know, and she, you know, and I thought that's a really great scene. And I also like, you know, and I think honestly the only 2 deaths I really don't like is it feels like it fits in with the form of the later series, is the bus getting hit by a bus, and then of course, like, you know, the scene where, like, you know, a dude gets hit by a sign at the end. I'm like, those are the only 2 deaths I feel like felt like they're cliche deaths. You know, even like the scene where, like, a dude gets his head cut off, that feels messed up and everything. Like, someone gets strangled in the bathtub, they probably wouldn't do that nowadays. They'd probably more or less just make it like where, oh, the bathtub, you know, like all of a sudden the pipe, he's about to get strangled, but then the pipe comes down and crushes his skull in, you know, or something like that. They wouldn't do a strangle because that's too depressing. They want to make it fun deaths, and I like that this death that made when you die, it's emotional, it's depressing, it's draining, and I like that how these characters react. The acting in this movie is actually sad, because this movie was made to feel like a one. It wasn't made to be a series. It wasn't made like, oh, like you know, there's even a show that used to come on Spike TV called 1,000 Ways to Die, and it would just be like characters like, oh, this character, they snorted ant beds, and this is how they died, and, you know, it's kind of like a Final Destination knockoff of like, oh, 1,000 Ways to Kill You, you know, and it's just kind of dumb, you know. And I thought this one thing I like about this movie, especially you have the late great Tony Todd, who basically knows, he's a coroner, and he basically gives them facts about death, saying everything that happens in life is a pattern of death. Like, you know, the planes we get on or walk off, you know, and he basically makes this point to Alex. And apparently this movie was supposed to just be one movie. It was not supposed to be a series, because the movie actually, Alex dies at the end of the movie. In the original ending, he dies, you know, and apparently test audiences hated that ending so much, because it was just supposed to be an ending movie. Like, it was supposed to be him and Claire had sex on the beach in that one scene where he's looking at the Flight 180. He was on the beach, you know, when he goes to the beach where the Flight 180 blew up and the debris went on the beach. Well, apparently they had sex on that beach, and then of course she gets pregnant. But what happens is, then that's the whole thing, is like there's a deleted scene where as pregnancy, she does a pregnancy test and she's pregnant. And what happens whenever like death comes after her and everything, and he pulls off the live wire, he pulls it off and he gets electrocuted and dies, and you see the charred body. And then of course she gives birth like 9 months later, and then of course, you know, and then of course she goes to his gravesite, you know, she sees like, you know, and then of course Carter's there, and he goes, is it, and then he puts roses down by Alex's grave and goes, is it over? And she goes, it's never over. And she's holding the baby, and you see, then she goes and puts him down, she puts their baby down, and she sees like the wind floating by like these, like, you know, chandeliers, and of course she knows that Alex is there to protect her. You know, it was an ending, but of course test audiences hated it. They also test audience also hated the scene where the dude takes a shit. Yeah, that's in like on the behind the scenes special features. They're reading out the test screenings, and they're like, a guy said he hated the one scene he hated the worst was when a dude was taking a shit, and they're just like, and Glenn Morgan read that out, and James Wan's like, no, let me see that. No, it doesn't say that. And so yeah, that's what made me laugh whenever they said that, because Yeah, it was like that's literally like that's what happened, and it made me laugh when yeah. And I think the idea. I'm glad that it did become like this big phenomenal thing because we got to see it gets overly stupid, like it later goes on. Like there's one with NASCAR blowing up and everything, to where I'm like, this would not happen the way it is. I mean, I'm like, there's no way. And also a swimming pool, like, that's already been debunked, where it's like I get in this Oregon slush. We'll talk about those movies later, but I do also think that, there's some great character moments. Like you have the bully in the high school that, he becomes his friend at the end, because you always expect the bully to die, and he doesn't. He actually survives the whole movie until the very last scene, and he actually survived the whole freaking movie originally. But then, like the test screenings, they reshot that ending and killed him. And I like the new ending better because it does feel like it fits in with the tone of the rest of the movie. The other one just felt more like a Hallmark movie at the end. This one it fit in with the movie. And I also like that Tony Todd is in this movie as a coroner. I've said this once again, because I just feel like he's in one scene, but it's a powerful scene where you think he's in the whole movie when you're like, no, he's only in one scene. And I also like the Nine Inch Nails song where Into the Voids plays, and that way Carter sees him and like he turns his car around, and you find they're all there for a purpose. It just turns out they're all randomly there, and then Terry gets hit by the bus. Even though I don't like the bus death, I think that whole scene and the motion around it is great. And I also really like, Claire feels like, like Claire, after the plane blows up and they all go there, it just like everybody's getting their family, hugging their family, kissing their family, and Claire doesn't have any family, and so in fact, they have to drive her home, which I'm like, was kind of a dickish thing. They drive her home and make her ass walk for the rest of the way. I'm like, you're an orphan. You're gonna walk the rest of your way home. We pulled up to your driveway. You can walk up that muddy ass driveway, orphan. Like, I don't think that cruel. I mean, I think that she just wanted to stop right there, but still. And I also like that, Alex does like, he starts getting these signs, and I like that everybody, it has a moment and everything. And I think this movie is so great because the plane crash, the build up to it is so great. It doesn't just start with them getting on a plane. It builds up to that plane where they're not at the airport yet. They're at the airport, and just all these signs and stuff where it makes it like, oh, is the plane gonna blow up? Is it gonna blow up? Then you see that plane crash, and you're like, how they're all dead? How do you? And then it's all in his head, to where you get off that plane, and that plane blows up. And Stifler sees that from American Pie, sees that plane blow up, and everything. Everybody thinks he's a monster, and the FBI thinks maybe he put a bomb on the plane, and it's just to where everybody realized, no, he didn't. It was an accident. But then people are watching him, and they're like, how did he know? And it turns out that's actually a true story. What happened when this woman was literally, she had a prediction that the plane was going to blow up, and it did. And so it was just random luck, And I think that's a really cool concept. And I like that this movie did that, because the movie's not like, if you're expecting lots of gore and stuff, it's not really. I mean, there's like 4 or 5 deaths in the movie compared to the later movies where it has like every 5 minutes somebody's getting their head chopped off or blown up, or ridiculous things, getting their head crushed in by a Buddha statue, and and just blood and guts everywhere. But I like this one because it actually tells you a unique story from these amazing things. And I would love for them to come back and work on more movies. I know they worked on 3, was the last one they did, but I know that Jeffrey Riddick, who wrote the original concept of the spec script for X-Files, he worked on the second movie but it was more of a story credit. Like, he worked on a concept of a story, then they rewrote the story and made it their own. While James Morgan and Glenn Wong, they wrote the third one together, and then the rest of the movies were made by different filmmakers. But I really appreciate this movie, and if I had to give this movie a grade, I'm going to give it an A. Thank you so much.
Sharpton for president, y'all. I'm outie.
Jesse Jackson for VP.